Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Robinson. This is the March 2nd, 2024 meeting of the Money Masters Investment Club. Got a few things to talk about here today. We'll do some housekeeping stuff as well, but let's look at the financials to our NAV actually. Ending NAV for 3/2/24, 36.38. That's actually a slight decline from our previous NAV. So we did retrace just a bit this month, or this week rather, 0.7%. The week started out pretty badly in terms of a couple of trades. The volume, or I shouldn't say the volume, the volatility in our main markets, the Spider and the Qs, fell so hard this week that I actually looked for a different market to trade, and I got into a different market on Monday of this week. It was the Russell 2000, and I got my backside handed to me on that day. So I spent the rest of the week trying to recover what was lost on Monday. Tuesday wasn't a whole lot better, had a minor loss on Tuesday as well. So between Monday and Tuesday of last week, we had some losses, and I recovered almost all of it, not quite, but as you can see, it was a little bit shy of getting us back to even. But the volume has fallen off. We're kind of looking for markets that will help us to trade without getting into too much trouble. And hopefully next week and going forward, some of our traditional markets will come back to more volatility. I think they're starting to. The Nasdaq this week did hit a record high on, I think it was Thursday. It was a brand new high. It's been more than 2 years since the Nasdaq has hit a high. The Spider's already at a high. So is the Dow. Those are both already at highs and have been at highs for quite some time. The Nasdaq finally caught up. So, having said that, not a great week. I'm not going to make any excuses for it. I probably shouldn't have been in the market that I was in. It actually traded very well later in the week, and actually traded well that day. It's just it surprised the turn it took when I was in the trade was such a surprise to me. It came out of the blue, and it went down a lot further than I was prepared to do, or prepared to experience, and I just ended up having to take the loss on it. But I kind of learned my lesson on that market. That market needs a little bit more coddling, if you will, and the entry price is a little bit more specific for that particular market. So if I use it in the future, the Russell 2000 will be more cognizant of that. One of the traders this week actually got so desperate he went over to the Dow. We rarely, if ever, trade the Dow. There's a ETF on the Dow called the Diamond. He actually traded that and made 11 cents. I don't generally trade the Dow because the Diamond has such wide spreads, and sometimes the spread is anywhere from 5 to 10 cents, and I don't like the idea of getting into a trade where I'm already 10 cents in the hole just from the opening. So once I get into the trade, the bid price is 10 cents below that, and so you got to make 10 cents just to break even. I don't like that idea, so I don't trade it that often. But he did actually make some pretty good money, and the market is a little bit more predictable than some of these other markets. So that might be an option for us in the future. But again, I'm a little bit more hesitant than somebody else might be because I'm doing so many contracts. But we are searching for markets that are a little bit more volatile than what we're getting in the, let's say, the Spider or even in the Qs. But the Qs towards the end of the week did spike up a little bit in terms of volatility. That's how we got back to some of our losses. But we need that to continue. And with the VIX where it's at, I'm not entirely sure it's going to happen. I'm still hoping that there's going to be something in the market to spike the volatility, but until then, it's a fight every day to try to generate some alpha. So, having said that, again, overall, not as bad as it was, of course, and we're almost at neutral for the week. And there are always going to be weeks where you do well and weeks where you just don't do that well. And this is, of course, one of those weeks where I didn't do well. If it weren't for Monday, we would have had a really good week. But of course, you could say that about a lot of things. If it wasn't for something, we would have had a good time. But at the end of the day, it is what it is, and we'll do better next week, I hope. I got one other thing to talk about before we end. So, as I told you, Monday and Tuesday of this week, I was under a lot of stress because the markets were just so hard to predict. Retracements, when the VIX is this low, you get some pretty steep retracements. That's what happened to me on the Russell 2000 this week. And when you're under stress, one of the things that happens is people start sometimes inundating me with questions or comments or asking me about something, asking me about a chart setting, or asking if I'm in a trade, or asking. And I got to tell you guys, it's really stressful to be asked questions when you're in a trade, especially when you're upside down in a trade. So I just want to make a couple of comments. So most everyone knows or should know that active trading can be very stressful, and it is. Traders are constantly scouring various charts and news providers for information on anything that could upset a trade. So once one of us or me are in a trade, we're constantly looking at charts. We're looking to see if there's anything that might indicate that I need to get out of this trade. I'm looking for things to tell me I can stay in the trade. I'm also looking for news sources. Now we have, during the day, we always kind of have a little heads up. I usually announce about 9:20 in the morning that of any speakers I know that are becoming, let's say a Fed speaker is scheduled to speak during that day. We usually announce that. So we're always on the lookout for that kind of stuff. We're also looking out for any known news that's coming out. A lot of financial reports come out, some at 10, sometimes at 9:45 once the market's open, and those things can impact the markets. We're always looking out for those things. Last week, my stress level was particularly high because of that first trade I did in the Russell 2000 at a time when I was inundated with queries about the charts. It was so bad, and I had to ignore them at the time because I'm in a trade, but it was so bad. The questions were constant or the comments were constant, and I just had to mute my speakers just to clear my head from all the noise in the background. And I just couldn't. It's one of the first times that this has happened to me. I mean, I'm not saying it's the first time, but it was the first time that my stress level was that high at a moment when somebody was asking me a lot of questions. After speaking with people I trust and respect, I found that they also experience the need to mute their speakers during the day. In fact, I found out it's a fairly common thing that a lot of the people on the daily call end up muting their speakers because it's annoying sometimes, or it's hard to concentrate when somebody's making comments or somebody's asking questions about the markets or whatever it may be. To that end, I have to institute some new rules starting Monday. So I'm in the office no later than 8 o'clock in the morning every morning. I look at the foreign markets, usually the European markets. I review the previous day's Asian markets. And Asian markets, by the time I get in the morning, Asian markets are closed. So we can kind of see those pretty quickly. I don't have to review anything. But the European markets would be open by that point. So I am sometimes looking at the European markets, of course, the futures markets in the United States. I do that to get ready for the 9:30 opening bell. So I usually start the Zoom meeting at 8 p.m. or I'm sorry, 9 a.m. every morning. So if you have questions about the charts, if you want to come on the call and you have questions about charts, chart settings, and all that sort of thing, we need to reserve that time there for those kinds of questions. It's not appropriate when we're in trades or something to ask about chart settings. So I'm happy to review and answer any questions during that time about chart settings or any news that might be coming up or what we're seeing in the markets and all that sort of thing. We just can't do it while the market is actually open because it just takes away from the concentration. At 9:20, that's where I'm going to kind of stop the questions as we prepare for the opening bell. So I usually leave my mic on. Even at the opening bell, when the bell opens, I usually leave my mic on. And if you're listening, you can hear me. I'm kind of thinking out loud. I'm thinking about which market. Remember that we're picking between 4 markets every day. 3 for me, some 4, because I don't do that much on the Dow. I'll still look at the Dow, but I don't generally trade it. But I am looking carefully over the Spider, the Qs, and the Russell 2000 to see which market I think is going to work the best that particular day, based on where the VIX is at and based on what the pre-markets are doing. So at 9:20. I have to make my decision about which market gets set up for that trade. And again, at that point, taking questions and stuff is just, it gets me distracted. And then there's been times where somebody's asked me a question and the next thing I know, the opening bell is ringing and I haven't even picked a market yet. And so now it's going to take me another few minutes to kind of get set up on whatever market I think is working the best. And the last thing you want to do is be late into a trade type of thing, because especially in the first trade of the morning, they move so quickly. So once the market bell does open, by the way, as I said earlier, I do think out loud, so you can hear me talking to myself, usually talking to myself. Sometimes Mike Harvey's in the office with me and he stands behind me at a different computer, and we may go back and forth about what market we think is doing best. But again, we're mostly just talking out loud about what our preferences are for the market, which market we're looking at, which options we might be looking at, whether it's a 50 delta or maybe we're going to a lower delta type option. But I do keep my mic open during that time while I'm talking. And if anyone finds that distracting to them, because they may find that distracting too, just let me know because I can always turn my mic off as well. Once I'm in a trade, I usually turn my mic off. Now, there's a lot of different reasons for it because I'm just going to say I get a little bit vociferous at times when it comes to being in a trade because sometimes you're doing well in a trade and I start cheering on for my trade, keep going, get up there, that type of thing. So I get a little vociferous there, but sometimes I'm in a bad trade and my vociferous gets a little bit louder and maybe not as polite. So at the end of the day, I do mute myself usually when I'm in a trade. But and I don't do it to be quieter. I just don't want to bother other people when I'm screaming for a trade or kind of cheering a trade on or cursing a trade when it's going the wrong way or cursing myself for getting into a trade I shouldn't have gotten into or whatever it may be. So I do mute my mic when I'm in a trade just to keep it quiet for everybody else because I know everybody else is trying to think too. So during this time, concentration is critical, and it's not a time for questions. It's one of the worst things to do ever, especially when you're upside down in a trade. And this is what happened to me on Monday. I was upside down in a trade, and then I had a series of questions from somebody, and they asked the same question 3 times before I just couldn't think about the question. I was in the trade. I was trying to figure out how to deal with the trade because it was going the wrong way, and at the end of the day, I got so frustrated, I ended up hitting the wrong button and exited the trade. I didn't mean to, but I was kind of anxious because I'm in the background. I got somebody questioning me, and I wanted to do a strangle in a trade, and a strangle would have worked, but because I was distracted, I ended up hitting the wrong button and exited the trade. And I didn't want to, but once you exit the trade, you make a paper loss, a real loss. And that's what happened. And that kind of set the tone for the rest of the week where I was kind of upset and it was kind of annoying. So we do have to set some parameters on what kinds of comments people are making while we're trying to concentrate on what's going on in the market. So, and I'm not blaming anybody, by the way. I'm not saying it was their fault that I took a loss on the trade because at the end of the day, the buck stops with me. So it was my fault. It was my trade. I was the one that was in it. I was distracted, but at times there's no reason I can't. Like I said, that day I did end up muting my speakers for a bit while I tried to figure out what to do. But sometimes you just don't need the added stress of somebody asking questions or somebody repeating something a couple of times while you're trying to figure things out. So we do need this quiet time. I do know, by the way. I told you we had some visitors in the office a couple of weeks ago or a week ago, and I did find out that sometimes it's a little boring to be on the call, especially if nobody's talking. I wish I could be more entertaining, but at the end of the day, we're trying to grow. I've talked to I told you my board, and we've kind of determined we're going to call them advisors more than anything. But I've talked to them, and what we want to do is grow our NAV to about 100 this year. I'm shooting for 100 by the end of the year. That means we got a long way to go. I'm going to get more aggressive on the trading, but it just simply means that I just can't be entertaining while I'm in a trade. So if you come onto the call and you expect you hear me talking all the time, it's probably not going to happen. And I feel bad for it at times. I feel like sometimes I'm supposed to entertain, but at the end of the day, my job isn't to entertain. My job is to make this NAV go from where we're at right now at 36 up to say $100 by the end of the year. That's the goal. So I just need to concentrate and I just need to do my job. My job is to grow the money. It's not to entertain. My job's not to explain every trade I do. I can do that, by the way, but we would do that before the day or after the day. So if you guys want to ask questions and stuff like that, that's fine after the day or when I'm not in a trade. Towards the end of the day, and I'm usually out of the markets by 3 to somewhere between 3 and 3:15. I rarely trade after that because it's the closing bell gets a little bit crazy, and there's no guarantees that you can get out of a trade in time. So if you have questions, save them for those times. If you want to know what I did or how I did it or why I did it, those are the appropriate times to ask those kinds of questions. By the way, I do want to make one thing clear. I'm not trying to discourage innocuous market comments from some that have noticed that a particular market is at or near a pivot point, support resistance line, or VWAP, for example. That kind of information is helpful and doesn't impact someone's concentration. What I mean by that is sometimes I'm going to trade, and there are some charts I don't keep up on mine, but I know others do. And I'll be honest with you, there's a chart that we call VWAP. I'm not going to explain what VWAP is. I don't usually keep that on my chart because my charts already have enough stuff on them. And if I add a VWAP chart, there's basically 3 lines with a VWAP. We have Bollinger Bands and then the actual VWAP. And when you put that on there, it can get cumbersome on your chart. And again, I don't like a lot of things on my charts because I want to see what the charts or the markets are actually doing. And sometimes you can put so many things on your chart that you can't actually see the movement of the market anymore. So sometimes what will happen is, and I'll be honest, and I'm going to name a name here. There's a gentleman named Russell Dial. He's the one that in our next meeting, by the way, or in our next live meeting, is going to be showing us some, or showing everybody what he does in terms of technical investing, how he draws graphs and charts. But he's really good about noticing where VWAP is at, or maybe that we're at a resistance line or a support. Now, I do keep those on my charts. I do have resistance and supports and pivot points. I do keep those because those are important charts. But I don't keep the VWAP. So there are times where he may just open his mic up real quick and say, make an announcement that we're at VWAP on the S&P or the Spider or whatever market we might be looking at. So he's good at that. And Russell, if you're listening, I love that, and I don't want to discourage you from doing that, because when he does that, guys, what he does is he just simply comes along and he'll open his mic for just a second. He'll say that VWAP or the S&P's at VWAP, and now everybody who's hearing that knows exactly they know what it means. So if you're in a trade on the VWAP and maybe it's stalled, now you kind of know why it's stalled, and you can kind of go, oh, it's at the VWAP. So at that point, you can either make a decision about whether you want to stay in the trade or wait to see if it's going to pierce the VWAP, whether it's going up or whether it's going down. That's a decision you can make. So that's good stuff to know. But it's one of those things where he's not asking a question about it. He's not waiting for me to make a reply or expand on why it might be at VWAP or why that might be important. He already knows that anyway. But at the end of the day, that's the kind of stuff that we want to hear. So I want to encourage that kind of stuff. So if somebody sees something like we're at a pivot point, or and those who trade with us know what pivot points are, and they're tough things to get through, and we've been dealing with them because the VIX is so low. We're dealing with pivot points for the last couple of months, more than we have in years, really. But that's the stuff we want to know. So I want to encourage that kind of stuff, where somebody says, hey, we're at a VWAP, or we're at something else, or there's a resistance line here that maybe doesn't show up on all of our charts. There are some other resistance lines that don't show up because we can only keep so many charts or different studies on our charts before they get so crowded you don't know what the market's doing. So if you notice something like that, speak up. But don't make it in a question. Just like Russell, just open the mic, make a comment, close your mic back up, and everybody would have heard you, and we kind of know what to deal with that. But that's the kind of stuff we like. That's the stuff that's helpful to me, especially because, again, I don't keep a VWAP up. It's just too burdensome on my charts, and I have so many charts. I don't want to put a VWAP up and try to figure out where the market's at while it's in VWAP. So that's one thing I do want to encourage. So going forward, if you have a question during trading hours, please ask if I or anyone else is in a trade before blurting out a question. There are times when I'm not in a trade, especially if I've had a bad day. There's a lot of times where you're kind of lick your wounds a little bit and you're not actually trading for a bit while you try to figure out what happened on that first trade and try to get a grip on what the trend is, why did you make the mistake, or what happened in that trade. So there's often times where I'm not in a trade. If you feel like you got a question and you want to ask, but you're afraid to ask because maybe I'm in a trade, you can always ask if I'm in a trade. If I don't respond, I'm probably in a trade, and you can kind of go back and wait to ask another time. Sometimes I'm not in a trade, though, and I'll go ahead and say, yeah, what's your question, and we can kind of talk about it. We're going to do it quickly so we don't disturb anybody else. But at the end of the day, it's not bad to, if you have a question and it's something you want to ask right away, just ask ahead of time if I'm in a trade or if anyone else is in a trade. And I generally don't answer if I'm in a trade because I've got other things to worry about other than answering somebody's question. So, but if I'm not in a trade, sometimes I can spit out an answer fast enough to, while we're waiting on the next trade. So the added stress of interruptions, though, especially when a trade is not going well, can be the difference between a good day and a bad day. So I just wanted to bring that up. It was just a tough week last week, and I was under a lot of stress. I've been under a little bit of stress the last couple of weeks with this because the VIX is so low, and it's just made trading so hard. We're going to get through it, by the way. The problem with the VIX, when the VIX is this low and the trading becomes harder because we have to hold trades. If you want to make some decent money, you got to hold trades hard or longer, but it's hard to hold them longer because the retracements are bigger. So it's not uncommon to go up in a trade. You might be up 20 cents, and a lot of times we'll take a 20-cent gain, but the market may want to go 60 cents, and you want to hold on to that 60 cents, but before it goes to 60 cents, you're up 20, and then it goes down 10. And it's tough to be up 20 cents and then watch everything melt away, and then now you're down, and you start kicking yourself. You say, well, I should have took the 20 cents. And then by the time you give up on the trade, maybe you take the loss, the market turns around and goes up not only back to where you were at 20, it goes on to the 60, and that's frustrating. And that's what happened to me on that day. It was more than 20, by the way, when it went down. But I was up 20, it went down 70, and then came back up. It took an hour, took a little over an hour, but it did come back up and actually went up another above and beyond where I originally bought. It went up another 60 cents from there. So it's just one of those days where, again, if I hadn't been interrupted, would I have stayed in the trade? I don't know, because it was a stressful trade anyway. But when you get those interruptions, when you're stressing and you're trying to figure out what to do, how to fix it, should you strangle, should you double down, should you just exit the trade? You got all these things going through your head. The last thing you want to do is have somebody ask you multiple times about a particular trade or something of that nature. So not pointing fingers, and we're all guilty of it. I'm just as guilty as other people. There are times I'll open my mic up and I'll ask somebody a question out of the blue, and then I think later I shouldn't have done that. Well, because they may have been in a trade and I might be disturbing them. But at the end of the day, we just got to be cognizant of what's going on. It's just last week was a really bad day, bad week in terms of the stress level. So we need to tone the stress down a little bit. This job is stressful enough without having to worry about offending anyone or answering questions or losing your concentration, or you can't analyze a position properly because you're stuck in a trade and you got questions coming. So I just wanted to point that out. Other than that, guys, I don't have anything more. I think we're going to have a better week this week. The markets are tough, and we're adjusting charts. Every day I'm spending another 2 and 3 hours after the market closes just working on charts. So it makes for long days, but this is the stuff I love. I don't mind doing the charts. It's just I wish the VIX were a little higher. We can make a lot more money when the VIX is higher, but until then, we have to learn how to hold those trades and just suffer through those retracements. It's brutal. They're just brutal. But now that I think we got a handle on it, in terms of the brutality of these retracements, sometimes you just got to do what you got to do. And it might be one of those things, and we've kind of talked about it with some of the guys, that maybe when we're up 20 cents, go ahead and take that profit there, even though you think it's going to keep going, because there's going to be that retracement, and maybe you get back in on the retracement. And it's a little easier said than done, because sometimes the market moves so fast that by the time you actually do it, you end up with a price higher than what you started with. So, but at the end of the day, that's why we do what we do. It's fun, it's fascinating, it's interesting, it is stressful. So I just need people to keep the comments to a minimum when it comes to things that are not that important. So if anybody has any questions about it or anything, of course, always shoot me an email, text message, whatever, and we can talk about it further. But other than that, guys, we'll see you on the call. For those of you who come on the calls during the weeks, we'll see you on Monday. And for everybody else, we'll talk to you again on the next meeting on Saturday, or on Friday or Saturday, whatever it is. Thanks, guys.